Awesome. Okay. Well, hello world, which is such a quintessential technology term for developers and folks who work in any kind of internet, anything, honestly. And so for those who get it, you get it. For those who don't, it's okay. You're not missing too much. But welcome to the Ancient as Mod Pod, which I know, isn't that the cutest name? I would like to say that that's a collaboration of George and myself. And so you're probably wondering, well, who is myself and who is George? And that's why this is our inaugural episode of the Ancient as Mod Pod. So welcome to all of you listeners, whether it's one person, 1,000 people, or 1,000,000 people. Thank you for lending us your ears. And if you found yourself on this side of the internet, hopefully you're going to have a good time. You're probably also wondering, well, what the heck are these people even talking about? And well, my friend ChatGPT who is a friend of many, when I used her assistance to figure out what this podcast might be about and who might be a great person to collaborate with in this podcast, George came up mostly because I told her to bring George up, but also because I thought that George and I had a lot of similarities and that it could be an interesting conversation for you all to get in on the conversations that we've already been discussing in private on our own Zooms, on our own Google Meets in our own free time. So, we're here today, hopefully, with the first of many episodes to talk about some various concepts. And so, this is the theme that ChatGPT gave us for this podcast, which I promise me bringing up her name often is going to make more sense real soon. But the theme that she says that we're discussing is how the ancient wisdom and modern technologies can be combined to shape better futures for humanity, bridging indigenous knowledge, digital innovation, culture, and community. Now, George, I didn't do much of an intro of myself because what's an introduction? But before you do your introduction, do you think that that's a theme of this podcast?
What you just shared just
Yes,
now.
what ChatGPT so kindly put together for us.
Yeah, I feel like that's a meta arc for everything we'll probably be talking about. And, I'm more of a fan of like emergent things. So I know as we talk, stuff will come out the way it's meant to come out, but we'll have that perhaps as our starting point.
Love it. That was such a George answer. I love everything about that response. So, George, why don't you introduce yourself and then I'll introduce myself because I know people want to probably know who we are.
Sure. So my name is Siosi Samuels, aka the Digital Wayfinder. I am of Indian and Polynesian ancestry. So my father is third generation Fijian Indian. My mother is Tuvaluan Samoan. If you're wondering which in my name is the Polynesian, it's the Siosi in the middle. And from my mother's side, for any potential families that may be listening to this in the future, from my mother's side, specifically my grandmother's side, we come from the Whakaua clan. And that is from Nanumea in Tuvalu, which has roots in Tonga. And so, yeah, my ancestry is kind of all over the South Pacific, but that's the joy of being, mixed race.
Yes, that is a lovely introduction. And I guess we're doing like our indigenous credentials. So I'm Grace Ewura-Esi Andrews. I too, like George, if you're wondering where the indigenous is, it's in that middle part, the Ewura-Esi. And I'm originally from what is now Ghana and in West Africa, for those of you who may not know. And I am a Khan. So my parents are from two different tribes that are classified under the Khan Confederation. My mother is a Chim, my father is Fanti. And what else is there to say? So my father, I actually recently found this out a few years ago, is from Crow Clan, and maybe we'll get a chance to
Ooh,
talk about
ooh,
that because that was very interesting for me. Because the Khan do a sort of like a clan system as well, as do many
yeah,
indigenous groups. Like, is there any
yeah,
indigenous group that has
Polynesians,
no clan system? Like, come on.
right?
But and if you are from an indigenous group who does not have a clan system, could you just like find me on the internet? And that would be at the new native on Instagram or TikTok. Thank you. Because I want to know more about you and your people. But
Yeah.
born in Ghana, raised in the States, in the South to be particular, and I don't have much of a Southern accent unless I'm really trying to turn on the charm. And I have a complicated, I guess, ancestry because my father is of which I think is very common for a lot of African descendant people, especially outside of the continent, but European and Caribbean heritage. The Caribbean heritage is a little unusual, but I'll tell that story maybe on an episode, and that could be really fun about how my ancestors from the West Indies, specifically, at least the only part we know is the Jamaican part that came back
Mm.
to Ghana in the late 1800s. And then some, you know, wayward European ancestry in there somewhere that gave me the
Yeah.
surname Andrews. So close enough to give the
Samuels.
name.
Look at us, us colonized,
Oh,
dark-skinned people.
I know it's like right in the name. People are like Grace
Uh-huh.
Andrews, and you're West
George
African,
Samuels.
huh? And it's like, I am.
Yep. Yep.
But and so for all those listeners out there who may not have your indigenous credentials or may not know your clan, may not know your tribe, love to you too. I think we're going to talk a lot about that in various
Yeah.
episodes around identity, which is
Mm.
honestly why I wanted to even create this podcast and have these conversations with you. It's related to our own individual things we work on, right? I'm working on the new native, you're working on a million things, but the thing that really strikes me about your work that you bring in is of course your digital wayfinder work and
Yeah.
also micro empires, which is how I even got to know some of your work. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about both of those?
Yeah,
I know
sure.
digital wayfinder is like your big overarching kind of,
Yeah.
identity, but
Yeah.
share a little bit more about that with us.
Yeah, no, perfect. And yeah, I realized I didn't really introduce myself with any of the career background aspects. So yeah, good
Nah.
segue. Yeah. So in terms of the ventures, so okay, well, first up, my original background was as a developer, starting out in my career. Then I moved more into sort of people-oriented roles, and that led me through, I guess, community, culture, and tech, that intersection. And that's where my digital wayfinder brand kind of encompasses those three things. So at the core of everything I do, it's always at that intersection of community, culture, and tech. Now, for micro empires and my digital wayfinder brand, digital wayfinding is essentially my term to describe this connection between my ancestral Polynesian wayfinding side with the digital, which is the space that I've been in from a career perspective. And so I think it was my wife who actually coined the term with me when we were here in Mexico. And that has just kind of stuck. People seem to like the name, and so I'm keeping it. Micro empires, since I am a multiple founder, so there are multiple things I've worked on. Micro empires is one of my ventures where it started out as a newsletter, originally just as like my own personal daily journal writing exercise that I turned into a newsletter, and it kind of morphed into the name Micro Empires because I was talking a lot about how there are all of these ancient empires, often small, that end up having an outsized impact. And so I became super fascinated by how some of these really small in size empires were able to punch way above their weight. So if you do go to microempires.cc, you'll find a lot of articles where I kind of explore this correlation between these ancient micro empires and modern micro empires with technology sort of infused with it. And this also gives rise to the concept of a micropreneur, which, due to AI, is enabling essentially more solopreneurs to have teams of AI around them, right? And if they happen to start becoming more of a success, they can intentionally choose to keep their team small as a business, just like ancient micro empires might have in the past, or even modern micro empires, right? If you look at Singapore, Switzerland, many other smaller nations who, again, punch way above their weight economically. So, yeah, that's a bit of a description of both.
Yes, nice. That's awesome. And I don't have a description of anything I'm doing because I've been doing a lot of those things in my mind, but this is my attempt to take them out of my mind. And kind of, the story of the new native is I actually started a storytelling project in 2014 called Native Storytelling. When I was living in Portland, Oregon, I even pitched it at the Pitch Black, which was for Black and Brown founders, and I did well. I think I came in first place, but it was before the first place was getting like, $50,000 of investment because it was like the inaugural group. So, I got a little something, something to try and make it happen, but I didn't get the something, something people are getting now. And what I was really focused on then was just how storytelling could be a liberating lens in which to tell our stories, not just ancestral stories, but stories that were inspired by ancestral stories, and how
Mm,
we, as a collective group of indigenous and native people globally, could have a platform to tell those stories and then receive compensation. So in my mind, I was thinking, you could put your stories on this platform and people could come to you, everyone from a Warner Brothers to, your local library down the street, and say, hey, will you come and tell us more about this story? We will compensate you, we will pay you. Hey, can you be in our writer's room? We will compensate you, we will pay you, etc. That was in 2014. So that was way before we were seeing the Black Panther. That was way before we had things like Echo on Disney Plus, or any of these indigenous and native stories and characters throughout time, etc. And
mm,
so in 2019, I had this concept of changing native storytelling to the new native. And it might have even been like the summer of 2018. I honestly can't remember. And the idea there was, I thought that modern day natives weren't having a platform to engage with one another and tell stories and share each other's stories, whether it's our cosmologies, whether it's that we don't know our cosmologies and we want to know our cosmologies,
yeah.
whether it's we want to know about traditional medicinal practices, whether we want to know about indigenous native religion, whether we want to know about textiles, whether we want to know
Mm,
about music, what art, whatever it might be. I felt like there
mm,
wasn't a place for modern day natives and non-natives, non-indigenous people to also go and appreciate the work of, groups of people who have been around for a long time, and like you said about micro empires, may not have been known but may have had a big influence on what we're doing today across industry, across verticals, and even across nation states and borders. And in the current iteration, I'm launching it mostly as a story collecting platform. So, what do I mean by that? I will be sharing my own stories, whether it's my own blogs about my own Indigenous identity and Native identity. And I wouldn't call it confusion because I'm not confused, but I would call it curiosity around some of the gray area, the places where we don't know ourselves, or I don't know myself, and having conversations with other modern day Native youth. Really, I mean, are we youth? We're
around
closer
50.
to 50 than to 20, so I don't know. But people
We
can
all
guess our
know.
age if they want. But so I don't know for exactly youth, but we're young enough, right? In a time where people are living longer, we've still got a bit to go. And I wanted to just create a space where people could submit stories, where people could have conversations. And so that's coming by the time this podcast launches. Thenewnative.com should be live. If it is not, someone please email me and kindly give me a nudge. But, the idea was, I kind of wanted to do something similar to what you were doing with micro empires, telling these stories that people may not know, of groups that we have maybe not heard of, and really just giving a place for that to shine, and also a place for my research to live. So what is my research? I study ancient symbols, but specifically looking at the Adinkra of the Akan, and which, that's even complicated in its own origin story, but trying to see similarities between other symbols of other tribes, of other places throughout time, and finding those instances of that wisdom being, accessible or being showcased in different ways. So that's even where the ancient as modern came from. I gave a talk about this, and this was kind of my rallying cry, is the ancient as modern. And then I added comma again, because I think that the ancient as modern is a cyclical thing. We get to these places in human evolution where the ancient becomes the new again, and
Yeah.
then becomes old, and then becomes the new again, and then becomes old. It's just this way of repurposing knowledge and wisdom in order to push it forward. And I'm really invested in the modalities that push it forward, especially symbolism and
Mm,
storytelling, and the power of totems in that way. And, that's something that George and I, we've connected over. And I think it's just really the backbone of the work that I'm hoping to build, and the work that I venture into from time to time with my personal research.
love it.
I mean, there
Love
you
it.
go. I put that out there. So let's actually start with my favorite conversation, which is about like symbolism and storytelling in the work we do, right? You just told us a little bit about micro empires. I know that you're also working on some really interesting stuff with culturestack.ai. Like,
Mhm.
you're bridging constantly this world of you're in a swirl state, which this
Yeah.
is me coining my own terms, right? You can agree, disagree, or dismiss, but you're in this swirl state, I think, where you're folding in a lot of elements of cultural practice.
Yeah.
And not only just your cultural practice, right? Other cultural practices, but you also work in high tech. And when I say high tech, I mean cutting edge, bleeding edge, like right there on the line of what a lot of people, even technologists, can start to comprehend. And
Yeah.
so I'm just kind of curious, like, where are you seeing the ancient as modern in the
Mm.
work that you're doing and the tools that you're building?
Um, Gosh, so many. So I think it's fitting that you use the swirl as a symbol because that's literally what I would say my life has been like over the last 20 years, maybe even up until now. But it's just this sort of swirl of exploration around all of these themes and these elements. And it is, but that swirl also has kind of a central point that it's leading to. And often you don't see the connections until you're looking back in retrospect, right? So as you're going through it, sometimes it can be frustrating because it might seem random, but the older I get, looking back, I can see, this is how it all comes together, why I went through these certain things, why I learned what I did when I learned it. And this morning, I actually put out a newsletter on my personal newsletter for the Digital Wayfinder about my decision to move back to Asia Pacific from Mexico with my wife. And that it will be happening probably over maybe the next 8 months, 6 to 8 months. And yeah, so it's a big decision, it's a timely decision, but there's been a call back to Asia Pacific. And this has culminated as a result, especially of my time in Mexico, because Mexico as a land highly transformational. And it has gotten me more in touch with my ancestral side. I've actually learned more about my ancestry being in Mexico than I ever did when I was actually back in places near to some of the Pacific nations. And what I found was that a lot of these practices that I grew up with, like dreaming, they exist in many indigenous cultures, right? And for me, as somebody who's mixed, who's raised in the West, who only spoke English, obviously a lot of this stuff is about me trying to reconnect with my own roots, right? And I think up until now I've been hovering at the edges always, right? And this is translated to my career. In my career, I'm often at the edges of things, at the intersections, and then I would be translating between those different parts because most people are wanting things to be boxed, labeled, categorized, etc. But I'm someone that doesn't see the world that way. And so the symbolism, I know that many indigenous cultures, they understand the depth of the symbols and the totems, and they intuitively know how to look out for them on a day-to-day basis and make decisions daily, from it, from like a certain bird flying past, right? From the number of birds, from the way that they perch themselves on a branch. All of these things exist, but because of technology, well, externalized technology, we have become numb to that. And so we have now merged ourselves with machine a lot more, so much of the point, right? Like we're just connected to our screens and devices constantly. And it's made me increasingly fascinated by the opportunity to potentially use that same technology that's drawing us in to push us back out, right? And it's also then looking at some of these inner systems or technologies, right? Dreaming is an inner technology. And that's how I see it, at least these days. And I think with AI coming in, it's made me realize just how important some of these inner technologies are for human beings. Because otherwise, we outsource a lot of our memory to the machine and we lose our own connection, right? So it's going to become very important to go back in again.
I love that term, inner
Inner,
technologies.
yeah,
That's awesome because I mean, first of all, right off the top, Mexico. as a nation, right? Which is a modern
Mm.
nation. We know that it's had many names throughout time. Many indigenous groups, clans, tribes have called that place home, some of whom still exist today, right? So, shout out to all the folks in that part of the world. It's powerful. It is definitely what, some would maybe call a portal. I don't want to
Mhm.
say anything or put anything in anyone's mouth, but I spent 2 years in Mexico, with most of my time being in Mexico City for the last 18 months. And it was an incredible experience. And those 2 years brought me, I think, to my knees. Like, if I'm honest, if
Mm.
about what that experience was for me, it was beautiful. The people of Mexico, no matter what region you were in, are beautiful people. They're polite, they're kind, they're loving, they're generous, warm. Doesn't matter where you are. Doesn't matter if you're talking to Zapoteco people, or you're talking to the Mexica, or you're talking to,
Yeah.
Olmec
Yeah.
people. It doesn't, or their descendants, or if they're a Spaniard hybrid, or if they are, actually just German Mexican and Polish
Yeah.
Mexican. It doesn't matter. The blanket culture of that place is just really so warm and
Mm.
inviting. And I think the subterranean energy of that place is so powerful, so potent.
Yes.
I would say that Mexico, as a geographic area, is an amplifier or a dampener. Depending on
Yeah.
what you're looking for, it can bring you up or bring you down, but no matter what, it's going to bring you in. If you spend
Exactly.
enough time there, you will have to go inward. And I think that that is something that I really appreciated about being there too, is that the culture of the
Mm.
people, especially the ancient people who called that place home, was in the dreamland.
Yeah.
They were about dream time through and through and through. And we both come from cultures that are about that dream life.
Exactly.
All my friends know, my family know, I live and I breathe and I will die by my
Mm.
dreams and the
Mm.
things I believe my dreams are showing me, telling
Yeah.
me, preparing me for, protecting me from, and even professionally. And I
Yeah.
think what's really interesting about what you're talking about is this need to, I think inside, let me take a few steps back. I think inside of technology, there are a lot of people who think different ways. I think that
Yeah.
that is what is actually really beautiful about technology as a field, is when you say, I
Mm.
work in tech, it's like saying, I breathe air.
Yeah.
Okay. But are you
Especially
breathing
now.
polluted air, right? Are you
Mm.
breathing polluted air in a polluted city? Or are you breathing like country air in a small mountain town, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
like, are you breathing high elevation air or sea level air? Like, what kind of air are you
Yeah.
breathing? And
Yeah.
technology now, like you said, it's so diverse. You can be in all kinds of fields of tech. And
Yeah.
we're both technologists, and we also both work in different types of tech
Exactly.
and have different technical backgrounds, right? And at the same time, the technology has now reached a place where we can start to match it with our cultures in a way we haven't been able to before.
Yeah.
Whether it's because now you've got, the kind of technological advancement that can map former ruins and we can identify, different places that we might have called home, or
Yeah.
it's because it's like the digital arc project of Tualu that is allowing for them to preserve their culture no matter what happens next and the kind of digital work you've done with them, right? Or other nations who are putting different things on the blockchain, whether it's their currency or whether they are tagging the success of their people and the preservation of their culture to systems where you can show the work, and so that
Yeah.
they can get the credit, right? And they can preserve themselves, whatever it might be. Technology has reached this really beautiful convergence where I think people who still have a foot in a world that other people might tell only in story, which is still very real for us. We hear an ancient story and we think of ancestors who we might know the names of, or who we
Yeah.
may not know the names of, but it's stories that we know have been passed down and passed down for 1,000 years. And I think
Mm.
that when an element of you is timeless, there's something really special about how technology today is helping us um, propel that if we wish, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's through AI, I did some work with AI visualization where I just was asking what different things might look like. I've asked for AI visualization to create me hybrid adinkras. I've asked for AI visualization to show me how Akan gods might look like. I've looked at other people's visualizations of what Yoruba and Igbo gods could look like, right? I've looked at other people's videos of these like futuristic South Asian worlds. It's like, well, what would Hindu culture be in 1,000 years in the future, right? People are doing incredible things around ancient cultures and showing a really beautiful part of tech. And I think for me, that same sort of like wake up call and what I could do with technology with my own identity that I just rambled on about happened in Mexico. The 2 years I spent in the nation of Mexico, I don't know exactly what it did to me in the sense of if you're
Mm.
like, pinpoint the day that you changed. I can't tell you that, but I think it was like this slow burn of working remotely from there. And it's like it found its way into my work. And I found that I was having trouble with the divisions between Grace the Akan and Grace the
Mm.
technologist and
Mm.
Grace the modern woman.
Yeah.
And they all started to blur for me, and not uncomfortably, but they just started to, I love spirals, I work in spirals, I spiral, and it just started to swirl around each other. And I wanted to do more with it. I was like, how do I? And I would look at your stuff all the time, be like, George is really out here doing something with it. Like he
I'm
is,
still figuring
he
it out too.
I just felt like you like had this sense of self in your work that was really
Mm.
beautiful, and that you had this sense of knowing, and you were
Mm.
applying things like a chakra system to things like internal like technology behavior. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
that's wild, but not
Mm.
because I thought it was like unimaginable, but because that's the kind of stuff I was thinking about. Like,
Yeah.
can we apply these systems
Yeah.
to the system of technology? And I just find not a lot of people are being very public about doing it. And that was
Mm.
very, very important for me.
Yeah. No, I mean, I can definitely relate as well because I'm also figuring this out, as I go, right? And I always find it funny when some people look at what I'm doing and and they think that I have everything together. It's like, nope, it's all coming together as I'm putting it out. But I think the most important thing is just not being afraid to put the stuff out, and by getting used to putting this stuff out, it allows me to be able to maybe help others give themselves permission to put those same things out. And I think I can do a better job even of doing that. And that is my plan. So, even with like as you were talking, when you're talking about like those three different parts of you, it's like, why can't you be um, a female econ technologist, right? Like that could be your title, right? And I think I'm also in that place of trying to integrate these parts because I have also felt like this technological, highly technical side of me, right, um, doesn't always gel with these sort of topics or parts of us that are very easy for us to talk about, but not always easy to translate for the layperson or to translate in professional environments. The thing is, I know there are a lot of people like us as well who are in the technology space but also understand these deeper aspects. And I think we're hitting a time where it is going to become maybe safer to talk about these things because if you see right some of the people that's starting to get popularity, Graham Hancock, the Forbidden Knowledge guy, I forgot his actual name, right? But it's really cool to see some of their stuff get out because the topics that they're sharing, they've been sharing it for decades, but mainstream wise, it just wasn't a thing that people would accept, right? And so I think now people are questioning a lot more. We're wanting to find out our true roots, our true origins. And earlier we were talking about like where are we indigenous from, right? The indigenous aspect. I know there's a lot of political issues around who can call themselves indigenous or not. But as someone who's mixed, right? I'm like, well, what's my identity then? People are talking about what nationality they are, what indigenous group they're from. And I think the more I've explored it, the more I've realized, well, if there are some of us that aren't indigenous anywhere, where are we from? Right? And so I think that's where it comes back to, the question of being indigenous or not. And what do we mean by that when we're saying we are indigenous? Because how far do we go back? We technically should all be indigenous to Earth, And so then it becomes about, okay, well, which part of Earth are you saying you are indigenous from, right? But even if we go further, what happens if we find out that we have star origins, that we're not even from Earth? Then what happens to that conversation, right? So I think all of these things are embedded in a lot of the mythologies, the stories, etc. And to connect to as well the decision to move back to the Asia Pacific region, um, it is because I also discovered in my travels I was always being pulled to places around the Ring of Fire or the Pacific Rim. For those who aren't familiar with the Ring of Fire, and in many of the cultures along this rim, there are stories of serpent beings, dragons, flying serpents, and I think in some places they call it the Nagas from the Southeast Asian region and even South Asia, India. And so I found this really interesting because the Ring of Fire itself is tectonic plates, and it's highly it has a lot of high volcanic activity, right? So fire element, but a lot of the stories and the mythologies around these serpents or serpent beings often have to do with like water, treasure, and protecting them, right? And so I think this sort of blend or duality, right, of like water and fire, but still tied to the land. It kind of covers all ranges, right? If you look at heaven, earth, and even the underworld, right? And I think this is something that I want to explore more moving into my next chapter. And I realize if I'm to do that, I have to kind of go to the roots of my own culture. And that, of course, means learning the language. And so part of the decision, I was doing a lot of exploration around okay, if I want to learn my next language, right? And as a note, English has been the only thing I've spoken, right? Language will limit, but also expand certain knowledge systems. And so I realized I need to learn sort of a root language for my Polynesian side, and so that I can start to open up perhaps more of the knowledge that may be already embedded in my own DNA, in the dream time, etc. Because I've essentially been getting dreams that are in other languages, and I have no context or conscious awareness, right, around what that may mean. And so I think, yeah, learning a new language, but that is tied meaningfully to my own roots, will be incredibly important for this next stage. And that language is looking like it's Tongan.
Okay, well, I was gonna ask. I was like, "Well, what are you gonna
Yeah,
learn?" And I
yeah,
was like, "Don't leave us like on this
yeah,
cliff." I'm like, "Ah."
yeah.
Well, that's really, really cool. I mean, you've said a lot of incredible things that I can
Hmm.
really see myself in the sense of like, I have this debate all the time. Part of the reason that I didn't even like launch my website when I changed it from native storytelling to the new native, it's been in work for 3 years plus,
Yeah,
is
yeah,
I was worried about what native people would say about someone like me claiming native. Well, what does someone
yeah,
like me mean when I say that? Well, I
yeah.
say someone who immigrated to the US when they were almost 5, someone who was raised in rural small town Tennessee. I'm talking 15, 16,000 people. I'm
Hmm.
talking about someone who speaks European languages with proficiency. So, what are the languages I'm talking about? Spanish, French, English, Portuguese. Someone
Yeah.
who, I mean, I speak my indigenous language. I speak Tree. That was a very big thing for my parents. I understand my father's. I understand Fanti. But
Mm.
I thought that there was such an illegitimacy to my identity because the land that I was born on was not even technically my biological land. So, what do I mean by that? I'm on one side of my family the descendant of slaves, enslaved
Yeah.
peoples who were in the West Indies who ended up in Jamaica finally and then got to Ghana. So, it's like, well, part of my heritage, I don't actually know where they originate from. And then the other heritage that I do know, they have Dutch and English ancestry running through their veins listen, for protection and political reasons of that time. And I'm not trying to judge what people in the, late 1700s, 1800s was doing, right? Because they did what they thought they had to do.
Mm.
And but at the same time, my surname is Andrews. It's like, can I be the face of anything that we're saying indigenous or native when
Mm.
the name I have is indigenous to like Scotland and Ireland? Right,
Yeah,
which are places I've been, beautiful places that I did feel a strong energetic connection to. So I'm not gonna hold you.
yeah.
But it just was one of those things. It's like, well, can I even use this term? Am I even allowed to? But at the same time, like grew up hearing the stories, hearing the songs.
Mhm.
I grew up speaking the language. I grew up eating the food. I cook this, I wear, ankaras, I wear kente, I wear this, I do that. But every time I've interacted um, with my own people on the continent, they're always like, well, where are you from? And I'm like, I'm from here. And they're like, both your parents? I'm like, both my parents, right? There's always been this questioning of, well, how Ghanaian are you? How African are you? How Akan are you?
Mm.
And it made me scared to even enter into this space, to even have these kinds of conversations publicly. I have them all the time academically because I'm an anthropologist by academic training. So I have them
Mm.
all the time. And I even have them with my friends. I have them geopolitically. But I have come to this conclusion, which is a hot take, and I just know somebody's going to get in my inbox and have a bad attitude, but that's just what that's going to be. And I have, for me, defined that indigenous is being of the land for as many generations as you believe time began, right? So, to me, indigenous means that you are on the land that if we went into a time machine and went 1,000 years back, 2,000 years back, you are where you've always been.
Mm.
and and or you are unrelated land, right? Because Polynesians did go to different islands, they did travel. You have different
Yes.
clans, different groups, where there's Samoan, Tongan, whatever, going
Yeah.
through the island. So it's not, so I want to open that up for island people, right? But at the same time, to me, native is a high calling. What do I mean by native? Because a lot of times we use indigenous and native as synonyms. We just
Mm.
phase them in and out. I am not indigenous to the United States of America or Turtle Island, depending on who you ask,
Yeah.
but I've been here for a while, but I'm still not indigenous to here and I'm not native to here, but I am a
Yeah.
native of another land, even though the land that I might be indigenous from is unknown. Because I also don't even know the heritage really of my mother's parents. They could have been
Mm.
from anywhere on the continent, right? From any
Mm.
numerous tribes, whatever. So I
Mm.
say all that to say, to me, native is like the vibration of my soul. As
Mm.
in, there are many people who are indigenous to many places. There are many people who the world might even call native, but they don't identify with that heritage. They are not conversing with the ancestors. They are
Mm.
not looking at the spirits for guidance. I'm not saying that's the only way to be native or to classify as native, but for me, it is the remembrance.
Mm.
And to me, it is that remembrance that makes me native. It's the desire not only to remember, but to root myself in that remembrance and to then be born of that remembrance and then to bloom from that remembrance. It's like I desire to be a descendant, in every
Mm.
sense of the word. And I think that that can get, philosophically complicated, but I think it's very simple in the sense of I desire to carry this lineage forward. I desire
Mm.
for my children or my nephews or my friends' kids, my cousins, whatever, to know the symbols. I desire for them to understand the stories that the symbols hold. I desire for them to understand the songs, the remembrance, the reverence of it all, and I desire to make that immortal. So whether history remembers the name of my people or not, I hope that the descendants of my descendants of myself know our songs and know our name. And I think that that's what being native is about, is that I'm rooting in myself this need to connect beyond timelines that we see today and even beyond mortal terranean timelines too. If it extends to the stars, which, as you mentioned, many indigenous, if not all, believe we descend from the stars, right? Or from the
Mm.
depths of the sea, and the sea is a lot like
Yeah.
that
As
the
above, so
deeps
below.
of the waters is like the deeps of the sky kind of thing. But
Yeah.
I say all that to say I think it's such an important conversation, and it's one that, once again, you and I have had this convo in different ways over the course of the last 18 months, but it's very rare I get a chance to publicly have it with someone who I feel like is on a parallel path and
Yeah.
who is who has been, once again, folding in the work and trying to not necessarily dissolve the barriers of the identity, but just fully step into it and what that means for the moment, right? As they
Mm.
say, wherever they say, meeting the moment. And I think that a big thing too, I love that you're going to learn the language, something that I did for myself during the pandemic that was honestly life changing. Is I did not know how to read and write in Tree. And I did not know how to read and write in Tree because my parents do not. And my parents do
Mm.
not because the British government said that they didn't need to. And
Mm.
so my parents were born in the early 1950s, and Ghana's independence is in the mid 1950s, but even the vestiges of colonialism are felt today. And one of those things was reading and writing in local languages.
Yep.
And I just felt this need, like you said, this call to awaken that in me. I was like, well, how would I teach my nephews to read and write in our ancestral language? I can't,
Mm. Mm.
because I don't know how. And I just
Yeah.
thought to myself, well, I've spent all of these years learning all of these European languages, studying them, going to language schools for them, going to the countries of origins to learn it, and even the language of my own people. I cannot read and write, and I don't speak it with the fluency I desire. you know
Exactly.
I'm at a
Exactly.
50 to 70%, but I want to be at a 99.99.
Mhm.
I want to be
Yeah.
deep in it. And so I took that on, just improving my tree, learning to read and write it. And I thought it was so important. And that's what even opened me up to the symbols, to better understanding the Adinkra, to the Adinkra speaking to me in different ways, which led me to
Mm.
other symbols, some being Polynesian symbols, some even being like Celtic symbols. It took me on this journey through
Yeah.
symbology and storytelling, and the door was opened because I listened to that call to just reconnect within. Like you
Hmm.
said, the inner technology
Yep.
told me to use, because I was doing it on Zoom with folks in London, right? So it
Yeah.
wasn't even like I was, going to a class in my body. I was
Hmm.
in, the American South, talking to folks in the UK, taking lessons. And so the technology itself allowed for that inner rewiring to occur. And I'm
Yeah.
still on that journey. And I think that that's so powerful. And I think it's also a really great place to end. Because
Mm.
this is only episode one. Like, the people need to know we're coming back with episodes here. But
Yeah.
as we end our inaugural episode, is there anything you want to leave the listeners with?
Mm. Hmm. Yes, I think just to add on top of what you were sharing already, having the courage to speak openly about these sort of things. I do believe that timing is a thing, right? Obviously using the wayfinding analogies, right? If you look at water, ocean, waves, when people are out surfing, they have to learn how to wait in time, themselves with the waves in order to ride it. But in our world today, I think we're so disconnected from nature that we don't know how to time ourselves. And so we think that we need to be on 24/7, right? We see this with our technology. And so we've forgotten how to rest or know when to rest and when to move. And so, if I was to look at what's happening now at a meta level, now is a good time where the wave is coming for us to be able to talk more openly about these sort of things. And the name of this podcast, I think, is a good sort of maybe signal, right, to help with that as the wave is rising. And I think this wave has been rising for decades, right? But time is relative, and time has multiple cycles within it. And so I think if you are somebody who is listening to this and have been afraid to speak openly about it, stop it, because it's time, to speak more openly about these things. And the only way that we can do that is if we just do it and not get caught up in our own minds about whether it's the right thing to do or whether people will accept it. Because just to touch on the identity part, right? I can relate. I'm of mixed heritage. When I worked on the Tuvalu project, the blockchain Tuvalu project, there were a lot of critics, who were saying that, like, hey, you haven't even been back to Tuvalu, so why are you trying to lead this technology project with, the Tuvaluan government, right? You don't know the people, the culture, etc. And maybe there was some truth to that. I think that was kind of hard to hear at the time because I just went in with a good intention, right? I was like, I can see how this technology would be very useful in terms of leapfrogging, but I do also understand that you do need to take the time to understand the culture intimately of whoever it is that you're engaging with. But there's a caveat. People like us, I think we're meant to be on the edges because we're the ones who also push things forward. Because there are also a lot of people who are in those same communities who haven't done anything, right? So they may have the blood, they may have the language, They may have the know-how, the local traditions and things, but they've never had the desire to do anything more. And so this is that tension I think that will always exist. People like us, it wasn't our fault that we were taken away from the lands. And so we also can't be held responsible for that. We can acknowledge it, and from our end, we can do something about it to reconnect. But I think that's why it's just important for us to maybe treat this more as we are exploring, anthropologists, right? We are researching things, we are sharing our findings. What you decide to do with that information is up to you because this is our journey and we are figuring things out along the way. And we hope that in figuring that out publicly, people learn something from it at the same time. And that's all there that it is. Because I don't think I want to be a credentialed expert in this sort of stuff, because that would might be intellectually dishonest, right, for me. But what I do want to do is explore this based on my own intuition, hunches, and dreams. And my dreams say it is time. And so I will follow that.
And it is time, I think. My dreams have also been saying the same thing in a very aggressive and loud manner. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that that's kind of the synergy too. It's to what I was saying about, to me, being native is hearing the call. It's feeling the vibration inside of yourself of all of your ancestors. And, the call home is powerful. It's like the conch shell being blown before battle, or it
Yeah.
is, that same shell being blown because of the birth of a new baby, right? It's like there's so many energies that that frequency of the call can have, and this is a time to be reborn and to prepare for battle. But it's not the
Yeah.
kinds of battles we've said or we've thought of. I think that it's a new world, and
Yeah.
we have to find the ways in which ancient wisdom weaves this thread that connects us to a far distant future, a future where
Yeah.
we may not exist in this form, we may not even exist on this plane. And how can
Mm.
we really anchor into to both at once? And I think that that is honestly what this podcast is about and what we're going to be talking about in all kinds of ways. So I'm really excited about the journey. I hope our listeners are too. It's been a great conversation. I hope you've had fun, George. And I guess
Definitely,
we'll be
always.
back. Yeah, we'll be back for the next episode, right?
Perfect.
Awesome.